to see you all here this evening. So there we go. Right, let's do from beginning again. So that's Blade and Races playing gently in the background. And I'd like to listen to the voice of this man when he comes in, because he's from Northumberland, possibly even a Northumberland coal miner. We can all sing this. Everybody who's from Newcastle knows the words of I went to Blade and Races. Every single one of us. As soon as we pop into the world, they give us a song sheet with these words on. Okay, right. So let's move on. Right. Thank you, Blade and Races. Let's go to the next slide. This is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Is the kind of history that probably most of you won't be aware of. I'm quoting here from Sarah Millican from South Shields, Tyne and Wear, who that's the same part of the world as I come from. I'd hate to live where people knew my history. I love familiarity on holiday, but not home, as I'm sure the neighbours would testify if I'd ever met them. I think this is quite funny because there's a lot of history that a lot of people never meet. And the coal and thoroughbred connection is one of the things that a lot of people have never met before. They're kind of like, whoa, what's all that about? And I also came across recently a useful word, disremember, a specific word that's different to forgetting. It's from Ulster speech, implying a disinclination to remember, sense of secrets which can only be excavated with some difficulty. That was certainly true when I came to be studying the story of the Galloway horse for my PhD. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Some of the history that's less well known about the thoroughbred, rather than the same old about the three founding fathers and so on. Hey, right. So there we go. Because I'm from the north of England, this is where the coal is. This is where the first thoroughbreds were actually bred. And this kind of which history gets remembered thing, the question of the origins of the thoroughbred can be seen not only as a question about Orientalist encounters between East and West, but also a question of internal dissension between South and North. This is a good quote from Richard Nash. And I like this one because that's absolutely what it's about. It's about the difference in culture between the south of England, the north of England, and Scotland, and also Ireland, but I'm not going to really going to be looking at Ireland tonight. Different histories. So the first thing I want to do is introduce you to my north, the north I know. It's the north of border reivers like Johnny Armstrong here in a rather romantic picture, border warlords who needed fastical horses for their cattle raiding. It's the north of Robbie Burns and his pony Jenny Geddes, possibly a Galloway, but we can't be 100% sure. It's the north of Tam O'Shanter and his pony that was so fast it could run away and beat the witches. It's the north of coal and railways and shipbuilding on the Tyne and in Glasgow. On the Clyde, it's very much an industrial part of the world. And it's also, this is William the Lion, who is sometimes credited with the start of racing, actually, in Scotland, William I of Scotland, not the same as William the Conqueror, not William I. And my north is what underlies it historically and still culturally is coal. That was what made it prominent. That was the important thing. The coal mines in northeast England. Coal mines aren't confined to northeast England on the island of Britain. There are many in Scotland. There were many in Scotland, in Wales, in the East Midlands, and little ones dotted all over the place. But one of the big coal mining areas is what's called the Great Northern Coalfield of Northumberland and Durham. So my north is also a place where we sing Blade and Races, a song about racing, and we call all horses Gallowers. Doesn't matter whether it's a Clydesdale, a fell pony, a racehorse, thoroughbred racehorse. These are little Yorkshire Gallowers working the cloth trade in the 19th century. It doesn't matter whether it's American saddlebred or a Pictish horse, they would all be Gallowers as far as we're concerned. So I'm going to give you a bit of background to why we call horses Gallowers and the role of Galloways in racing. before we go on to look at the cold thoroughbred connection. There we go. Oh, come along. No, we don't want blade and races again. Thank you. Don't want to go now. Okay, we call horses Galloways because of a land race from Scotland known as the Galloway, sometimes the Galloway nag, sometimes the Galloway horse. This is a rather romantic view of the Galloway in the 19th century, when they were effectively, as the sort of an original type, they were no longer existed. They'd been absorbed into other breeds. A horse between 13 and 14 hands in height is called a Galloway, from a beautiful breed of little horses once found in the south of Scotland on the shore of the Solway Firth, but now sadly degenerated and almost lost. The pure Galloway, purity is one of those words, isn't it? But I'm not going to tackle that one tonight, was said to be nearly 14 hands high and sometimes more, of a bright bale brown, with black legs, small head and neck, and peculiarly deep and clean legs. Its qualities were speed, stoutness, and surefootedness over a very rugged and mountainous country. So these were the things it was famous for: endurance, easy keeping, extremely fast, and could get over the landscape quickly and easily. Right. Okay. So that's why we call horses Galloways still call horses Galloways in the north of England, even though they don't in Scotland anymore. This is Galloway in southwest Scotland. This is Dumfriesshire over this side, but over this side we have Galloway. And the horses were probably bred mostly in the hills up here around this village, small town, village probably is better, called New Galloway. Here, there was an extremely famous horse fair, Kelton Hill Fair, where the horses were taken, and people used to come from all over the place to buy the horses from the region at Kelton Hill Fair. It's also a region, as you can see, with strong maritime tradition. So going right back into early days, there were connections across the known world, I suppose I could say. There were connections to the Islamic world. There were connections to Northumbria in the east. And this was actually originally a Brythonic speaking area, Cymric, Welsh, because large parts of Scotland were actually Welsh speaking, Cymric speaking for many centuries. And then later it became a Gaelic speaking area, and then later again Scots. Scots is a separate language from Gaelic. So I hope you're all, if you've got any questions about any of this, just bear them in mind, and we'll answer them at the end. So here you can see its position in terms of northern Britain. Newcastle is over here, and Dumfries and Galloway is here. Right. So the northern racing traditions in Scotland were highly developed. These are the Carlisle bells. You can go and see those in Carlisle today. They are the oldest existent, not just racing trophies, but sporting trophies still in existence in the world. So they're 16th century. And correspondence between Henry VIII's representative at the court of the Gonzaga family in Italy, who were great racehorse breeders in 16th century, suggests that the Cavalli Corridori di Scotia, which I think are rightly identified by me and a couple of other scholars as Galloways, were the fastest horses on the island of Britain this time. So for me, the story of the thoroughbred begins here. It begins in Scotland, and the importance of these horses and their cousins, the Galloways, in Ireland over the sea. So how long were they important for? Well, here's a couple of interesting illustrations for you. We think Charles II has got this kind of reputation of being, King Charles II, of being something to do with the development of the thoroughbred and racing. Actually, it's not true. He didn't import any horses. He didn't. He did institute plates for horse racing. He rode himself, and he was very enthusiastic about racing, but he didn't really begin to develop thoroughbred. Here we have two images, both by an artist called Richard Bloom, and this one is print by Francis Barlow, who was from Lincolnshire. And you can see was the last race that Charles II ever watched the horses running at. You can see these are small horses. They're not the kind of the bigger oriental types that people sort of associate with thoroughbred. And here again, also by Richard Bloom, we have these two little horses here. And right in the middle of the picture, see what we've got there? We've got a Scotsman. Okay. I think this is kind of a nod towards the fact that the horses at this stage, not called Galloways, but running horses, were actually still pretty much Galloways with some imported barb breeding in them as well. That's all in my book about the Galloway. I can't really go into it in too much detail now because you want to get into the coal. But so right at the end of Charles II's reign, the animals that are running are still essentially Galloway type. And what's interesting about that is there's a poem at the bottom of the Barlow print, and he says, the noble Pruitts, I think he would have said it Pruitts, he's from Lincolnshire, that's possibly exactly the way we would have pronounced it, with emulation fired, seeming by managers to be inspired, as if they understood their betters' will, they show with pride their force and skill. They're essentially racing Galloway. Okay. Now, so this is kind of, there is a whole school of thought, which some of you will be aware of, that says that it was the Arabian horse that was most influential on the development of the breed of racehorses. But David Livingston Learmonth, commenting on the illustration, is most enlightening as to the types of horse in common use in this day. The common aspect of the racehorses are the ferret back of any Arab blood. It's before the import of the Dali and Godolphin Arabian. The same year the Bailey Turk was imported, if he was imported, not as Richard Nash's death spread in Yorkshire. So it seems to refute those who contend that the English thoroughbreds are entirely Arab origin. He's actually having a go at Lady Wentworth here, but Lady Wentworth had died by this point, and so he's disagreeing with previous views he had where he supported her belief on the superiority of the Arabian. Now, let's get on to some coal. It's a bit hard for me to kind of describe what coal means to us in the north of England. It's kind of, it's cultural. It's almost semi-mystical, you know. So here's a nice lump of coal for you on top of a fence post to look at. And it's provided the income wealth for people in the northeast of England it's provided it for long centuries. Certainly as long ago as the 14th century, people were sending coal from the northeast down to London. Seem to have a bit of mic noise there. Somebody pop their mic off. Okay, but I like this one because also the person who's posted it is called Cuthbert, and one of the most famous saints in the north of England and south of Scotland is Saint Cuthbert. So there you go. Mystical, magical coal. Not everybody felt like that. One of the people by this reign of Charles II, coal was a really important product in Britain, and it was, as I say, being taken down to London and increasingly used for both domestic and commercial purposes. But John Evelyn, famous diarist, he says, on 1st of March 1686, came Sir Gilbert Gerard to treat with me about his son's marrying my daughter Susanna. The father being obnoxious and in suspicion of displeasure of the king, I would receive no proposal till His Majesty had given me leave, which he was pleased to do. But he clearly doesn't like this man. He says, besides that, I found most of his estate was coal pits as far off as Newcastle, and on leases from the Bishop of Durham, who had power to make concurrent leases with other difficulties. So it's like, I don't trust this coal mining thing. You hear more about bishops and coal mining very shortly. So he was also the author of the 1661 text, Fumifugius, the inconvenience of the air and smoke of London dissipated. Okay. How was coal extracted, this wonderful thing that made so much money and supported the British economy, you know, for centuries, really? Wickham, this is from a Wickham near Newcastle, History Society, shows you that in the early days, they were just literally pits in the ground, which is why we get pit ponies. Yeah, because they were the name pit stuck even when they were no longer pits. Or if you imagine that coal seam going up there, you'd actually be able to access it in a drift mine that would just have an entrance here and kind of come along the drift. But if you wanted the stuff that was lower down, you had to work these with the engines called wind engines, horse-drawn or manual with humans. So it was hard, dirty, arduous work. There were often explosions. The sides collapsed on people. Wickham is where I learnt to ride, actually. It's where I went to a riding school. So it's a quite an important place for me for that reason as well. But for coal, yeah, there were little coal pits all over North East England and bigger ones. Here's a horse working a wind gin in the way it would have operated. I've worked this wind gin to raise the coal here using these. Okay, so hard, dirty work, but extremely lucrative, dangerous work. In 1840, there were men, women, and children working in the coal trade, creating this wealth. In 1842, legislation came in to ensure that there would be no more women and children working underground, but ponies would replace them doing this kind of work, hauling the coal out by tubs, drawing tubs, your classic pit pony, in other words. Now, it's an interesting situation because I grew up with the, phrase, at least we don't send women and children down the mines any longer, and this is a good thing. But in actual fact, it was much more complicated than that, because this was one of the best paid jobs that women could do. When it was taken away from them, some of them tried to get back into the mines dressing as men. They were really angry about being forced out of their more lucrative jobs. They were never allowed to hew the coal. That was always a job that was for men. But in the hauling out, yeah, in various ways of carrying coal out in baskets on their backs, yes, they did a lot of those. So it's a very complicated situation. But the reformers certainly did not want women working underground in mines. I find this one interesting because this is from the 1850s, in a parliamentary court, the right-hand side image of a woman miner. Her face is black with coal dust. And the reformers are clearly, really incensed or annoyed about this and say it's got to come to an end. But the way they present her, you see, they present her in this kind of piratical way, with her skin black with coal dust, dressed almost in pirate clothing, hands on hips, looking as if she didn't give a damn, and she probably didn't, to be perfectly honest. She was happy earning money the way she was earning it, but not at all the kind of feminine woman that they knew in their own women. So they really weren't happy about this at all. But I find it interesting because they kind of present her almost like famous pirates, Mary Bonney and Mary Ward, I think was the one. So like, no, she's a contributor to the economy. Don't show her like this. This is just offensive, really. Okay. So no coal, no thoroughbred. Now we get to the nitty-gritty of the no coal, no thoroughbred. The one on the left is coal, the one on the right is thoroughbred. It's the West Australian, owned by Sir John Bowes, a very famous racehorse in racing history. John Bowes was one of the wealthiest people in the north of England. His family owned coal mines, and he used the money. This is a pretty standard pattern, to invest in an enormous house, which is now the Bowes Museum in County Durham. Some of you may have visited it. And also a famous racehorse stud, no longer in existence, at Streatham in County Durham, also in County Durham. West Australia is one of the most famous horses he bred, and he hired a very famous trainer, John Scott, the Wizard of the North. He's just one of a number of people who made their fortunes in northern coal and invested in racehorses. There were so many others. Okay. In this map here, I'm just having a bit of trouble because that's it. There we go. I'll move that over there. Right. This is a very useful one. It's from Frank Musgrave's North of England, A History from Roman Times, because he shows the connection in the 18th century between racecourses, coal, and rotten boroughs. and the rise of the Whigs, effectively. The Whigs were very much involved with the Jockey Club. So here, up here, you've got the Great Northern Coalfield. You've got race courses at various places, including Newcastle. You've got coal over here at Workington, the Lowthers, also great horse breeders. And here, the Bridgewater coal mines, canals, also very important. Along here, you've got a scatter of nomination boroughs, which were basically places where politicians could get in very easily. There's a whole complicated story to it, but you know, basically you would have a problem getting into these boroughs. And we've got the Yorkshire and Derbyshire, East Midlands mines here, Chatsworth, Devonshire's at Chatsworth. We've got Portland's at Welbeck. We've got the Wentworths, the Fitzwilliams at Wentworth Woodhouse, the Rockinghams, all big names in coal, all massive names in racing as well. Okay. Right. So the connection, yes, certainly politics, coal, and the racehorse. And Yorkshire is the key place really for the Yorkshire and the County Durham border. This is where the Dahlia Arabian, but the Biley Turk were. But all the other horses, well, you'll be hearing more about those very soon as well. Okay. So let's have a look at one of the most famous of all time, Whistlejacket. Born around 1749. This is his portrait, which is now in the National Gallery. He was, let me point out, first of all, he's foaled in the north. This isn't at all surprising. Belty Castle in Northumberland. He was owned by the Marquis of Rockingham, senior Whig politician, whose fortunes were established on coal. And he's got this highly developed mythology about him attacking his portrait while it was being painted. It was supposed to be a portrait with a king on his back. This isn't true. It's named after a cough mixture. So there's a massive Whistlejacket, you know, mythology around it. It's so important. He was owned by the Marquis of Rockingham, whose heirs were the Fitzwilliams. And this is they had a house called Wentworth Woodhouse, and they had a special room. Now, this is the absolute link between coal and Thoroughbred, that they kept the portrait in. 40 feet square, splendor, was breathtaking. 8 doors with Palladian pediments led into it. The walls and ceiling are brilliant white, sculpted with stucco paneling embossed in gilt, depicting vases of flowers, heroes from Homer's mythology, and eagles with spreading wings. You can just visualize this, can't you? It's still there. You can actually go and see it, but the portrait is there. A sumptuous Orbison rug lay across the glazed ribbon floor, polished with beeswax from the apiary in the grounds. Gold dusted in furniture, pair of gilt candelabra, 7 feet high, holding 24 candles at opposite corners, a long gilt settee. So you can go in there and gaze on this wonderful horse, you know. And the scale of luxury, the sheer beauty of the Whistlejacket room replicated 300 times over. This is how big this house was. And the other rooms, paid for and maintained by the profits from coal. This is what people who had the wealth from coal did. One of the things. Let me introduce you to another character from early racing, Cloudy, the Warlock Galloway. She's not quite contemporary with Whistlejacket. She died just about the time he was coming to prominence, where he was born. She ran successfully in several races in the north of England, bred many foals, at least one of which is significant in the general stud book. She has no mythology. We only know about her because of the survival of one of the stud books, stud records of her owner, Cuthbert Routh, and C.M. Pryor published this in his early records of the Thoroughbred in 1924. No mythology, no portrait, no nothing. Don't know about her genes particularly, but we're pretty sure she was small. And it just goes to show that horses called Galloways, though we can't be 100% sure what it means genetically, were very important in the stud book. So we're talking about coal and money. How much money? Lots of money. In 1917, the ecclesiastical commissioners, that's the church folks, gained about 410,000 from mineral properties and about 300,000 in the 1890s, including some 8,500 from Yorkshire. That's 23,444,130 pounds 47 pence. at 2023 rates. So you can see all these names: Lord Durham, the Duke of Hamilton, Duke of Northumberland, all coal, all absolutely coal. Lord Tredegar, Welsh coal. The Marquis of Bute, who's from Scottish, but had his wealth in Welsh coal mines. But some of the wealth he used from that to create a grand house on the Isle of Bute with his native chart on the ceiling. So that was £6,232,707 at 2023 rates. British coal production reached an all-time high of 185 million tonnes just before the First World War, so not too far away from this period. And obviously, there's, today there are massive issues talking about coal, talking about fossil fuels, the use of coal and fossil fuels. People made money out of it for a very, very long time. What was life like for the miners in the 1920s? Well, in 1923 in Scotland, one journalist saw a miners' row with 400 or 500 houses, all of them single apartments, with 2 holes in the walls for beds. That was it. It was certainly a happy home, as happy as it could be made under the circumstances. But in one of the beds lay an injured parent, brought home from the mines, writhing and groaning in agony, and then the other bed lay a dead child. And at night time, during the period of waiting between death and burial, the dead child had to be lifted out to allow the living ones to get in. In Scotland, a type of serf system operated for several centuries. It was only repealed in the late 1700s by an act whereby the colliers and salters could be transferred by their owner, the mine owners, as if they were owned. Their families could be passed on to work. They were born into servitude, effectively. Okay, Duke of Northumberland, when he finally had to admit how much he was making from his money at a commission in 1918, 21st in the Duke's table of precedence, so he's quite a long way down, actually. He owned 5 stately homes, 250,000 acres, and a townhouse in London's Kensington. He had to tell the commissioners against every fibre of his aristocratic being how much income he received from coal. There was a sharp intake of breath when he told them how much it was. I mean, sort of by today's standards, it wasn't massive. I think it was 600 and something, 63,000. But you have income from other sources as well. This is one of the Waldegrave collieries in County Durham. I wanted to show you this because of the pictures of the little pit Galloways, pit ponies. And interestingly, the ones with Shetland blood will have had the same genes because they were closely related to the Galloways. So in the genetic makeup of these little ponies that are only good enough, apparently, to work in the mines, it's still the same genes that's in the racing Galloways. It's a great irony, really. But the Waldegrave colliery was owned by the Blunt family, which I'm sure you've heard. They were inherited from her grandmother, Annabella Millbank, Lady Byron, and it was that inheritance that paid for the trips to buy horses and set up a private stud. Her inheritance from Lady Millbank. Okay, the Waldegrave, they had a few others. There was a Byron mine as well, named after Annabella, not Byron. Byron's name is not very popular in the North of England. And the Euston in County Durham is another one of their mines. Okay, so why did thoroughbred horse racing develop on the island of Britain and not elsewhere when other nations had access to the same imported Oriental horses? This is a question that's been asked a lot over the years, and it's one of those histories that's been disremembered, but I have remembered it. Because the elements that were essential to the creation of the thoroughbred were already there. They were the qualities that existed in the Galloways and Hobbies of the North and Ireland. They were probably closely related types anyway. So the addition of other genes added height, possibly other qualities, but without those Galloways and Hobbies and coal, no thoroughbred racehorse. Okay, so the thoroughbred racehorse is a genetic mix paid for in every sense by coal. And when I say paid for by coal, I mean paid for by the income from coal, paid by people dying underground to produce the coal, people and horses dying underground to bring out the coal. The complicated thing about it is that you can't really pigeonhole a thoroughbred racehorse as an elite animal in any sense, because thoroughbred racing became popular right across the world. These horses that were originally first bred from a genetic mix in Yorkshire. So in Jamaica, in Hong Kong, anywhere you go in the world, you'll find thoroughbred horse racing. It kind of crosses boundaries, like our Bladen Races song, which is about ordinary people going to the races. And in Northumberland, the Northumberland plate was called the Pitman's Derby, because the pitman used to go there and bet on it. So these are really, to me, much more complicated and much more interesting histories, because they bring in so many different aspects. They bring in Galloways were being shipped to America for use in the plantations in Suriname. There are connections between enslaved people and working class people and the hugely wealthy people and what they do. And they all met and mingled on the race course. You know, they all went there to enjoy the races. So I found this a very fascinating history and far more interesting, to be perfectly honest, than the three founding fathers mythology. But right at the last, of course, I have to say this. There's not, least of all, is there cold objectivity in my own narrative, since my own linguistic centre of gravity is the north, and especially the northeast. It's part of my history. You know, it's part of my James Cole horses. My only defence is that in order to reclaim the history of Northern English, she's talking about language, but I could say Northern English racing traditions from obscurity and marginalisation, this itself the product of unconsciously or consciously of an ideological perspective in the writing of histories of English. It has been necessary once again to feel what it's like to be a Northerner. To paraphrase a Northern proverb, you can take the woman out of the North, but you can't take the North out of the woman. I have no idea how we'll do for time, but I think we should perhaps take a few questions there if people have got them. So let's have a look in the chat. Right, okay. Sharon's asking about the sovereign's transport in 1816. What records are available about Queen Anne's transport of her horses to the racecourse? I don't think there's very much, because of course there was the Moona mare that was who's sometimes called Queen Anne's mare, but I don't think we know anything about how she was transporting them. There, in the sense of, were they using early kind of wheel transport? I think that came in slightly later on. The transport of Darley or other horses to England, yes, we have a letter from young Darley to his father, but it's not very revealing, actually. It sort of says, "Dear Dad, I found a horse. I think you might like him. The locals say he's very good. I'm going to ship it back." And that's about it. That's, you know, but there's this lovely mythology built up around how special and how marvelous he was, and the whole thing. The letter still exists. Yeah. So happy to answer any questions now. A lot of this material, along with other material, is in my Galloway book, which is due out very soon. I seem to have been saying that forever, but it genuinely is due out very soon there. Jeannie, you commented it's a really interesting note about women wanting coal jobs because they were relatively well paying. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, they gave them a degree of independence, that money to support themselves or their family. But obviously it was not very popular with the reformers who imagine kind of drawing up the, you know, horrified faces of these young women. And there's one women who were actually shifting coal at the top of a pit head somewhere, and they were seeing a bunch of them riding on a single horse, and the reformer who was there, he said something about, and there they all are laughing and smoking and jingling the money in their pockets. He's like, this is terrible. It has to stop.
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah,
of different perspectives going on.
yeah. I think I'd rather be working in the pit with a few bit of money in my pocket than working as a servant in somebody's house somewhere.
Let whoever needs to know that I'm on it.
Noel was using the horse jockey's sawdust to sweat horses. What a good comment. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that were the case. Absolutely would not be at all surprised if that was the case. Yeah, that was a big thing in Yorkshire, so I would think that was very likely. So it's a pretty different aspect of the thoroughbred story, probably, that most people are used to, because we're used to the three founding fathers and all the mythology that surrounds them. But for me, this is the roots. This is the origin of it. And I guess I'm kind of the kind of person who tends to go follow the money. Where did this come from? What paid for it? You know. But obviously, coming from the northeast, you know, coal spot my heritage. So it was a natural place to go.
I have a question, Miriam. It's not terribly well shaped, but on the big picture, I got to thinking, follow the money. We now live in an era of climate change that people 4 centuries ago knew nothing about. What effect did the coal mining in the northern reaches of England have on the grazing on the grass, the quality of the foodstuffs that were going into these more refinedly bred animals as studs were
Well,
being.
this is, yeah,
Oh, go
super
ahead. I think you
question.
catch the drift of where I'm going here.
I do, yes, I do. Actually, that's a really very good question, because when you get to Wentworth Woodhouse, um, the collieries were actually relatively close to the house. They are one of the interesting families, the Fitzwilliams, because they ran the collieries themselves. That was not always the case. Sometimes you could be a lease system. So they would certainly have been affected by the smoke from the collieries. Wouldn't have been that far away. They looked after their miners extremely well. They were sort of paternalistic, but they looked after them extremely well. I do know of a particular instance. It's not coal mining, but it's mining, and that is the lead mines of Weardale in County Durham. The pack horses there were called Galloways, because we call all horses Galloways. So they were carrying lead from the lead mines over to the smelter near Hexham. And there was so much lead about in the ground that there was a practical reason for them wearing grazing muzzles. Grazing muzzles, obviously, you need to put them on pack horses, otherwise they'd be stopping to eat all the time and you'd never get your deliveries done. But there was also a practical reason, because otherwise, yes, they would have been contaminated with lead. A lot of the grazing was contaminated with lead. So yeah, that's a very good question. In some cases, yes, there would have been certainly sort of contamination from coal, definitely. But on the whole, sorry, I was just going to say, on the whole, the pits and the studs, the racehorse studs, were not terribly close to each other. Yeah.
I'm thinking of geography because here in America, having toured the bluegrass region, there's a lot of mythology built among that and the calcium and the bones of the foals and all that sort of thing. And you can, as long as the climate is conducive, you can grow that kind of grass most in the middle regions of America across from east to west coast. But why then, I think we know the answer, did the studs, the breeding, get concentrated in, I suspect, regions much further south than the north of England when the breed was being built in the thoroughbred breed?
I would disagree with that. I would think say it was pretty much in Yorkshire where the breed was
Oh,
being built, and that was
okay.
where the certainly when Daniel Defoe in the 1720s, he's saying, Yorkshire, they're breeding some amazing horses there, and they're much faster than Barbs. Barbs were the standard by which people kind of one of the standards by which people judged speed. And he says, they can gallop over deep ground and they can do this and, boggy ground and they can do this and they carry more weight and they're superb horses. So I'd say that Yorkshire, yes, really is the true home of the thoroughbred. Absolutely. Thoroughbred breeding. And that would be the place where imported stallions were meeting and mingling with horses of more mixed descent, the mares, Galloway hobby, with some barb in, because there were definitely barbs being imported into Britain in Henry VIII's day from the Gonzagas, yeah.
And would that have been on grazing on local grass, or would it be imported hay in Yorkshire for valuable stallions?
They'd make their own hay. They would make their own hay in Yorkshire. It's
from
it's a vast county. It's the biggest vast county, with a vast county for Britain, let's say. There are plenty of agricultural areas in Yorkshire, so they wouldn't have a problem with producing hay as well. Only in the sense that producing hay in Britain is never straightforward because of the weather, but they'd have had plenty of decent quality food for them. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
So late Anthony described land transporting the resources in a pumpkin-shaped carriage on leather springs. Oh, where's Sharon? Which book does that appear in? That's brilliant. I love the idea of that. Sharon still in? Yeah. No.
Miriam. Hello, can you hear me?
David, hiya. I
Hiya,
can,
all
I
right?
can. Hi there. Nice to see you.
It's interesting in history. Horses has been used in coal mining in 3 sections of the coal mining, both underground, in the winding, in the Austrians, but also in the early parts of the 19th century, the early railways, particularly around here in the East Midlands, there was horse drawn from the pits to the canals.
Right. Yeah.
So you can look at all them sections again, coal out of a pit, both from underground, particularly after the 1842 Act, when ponies were introduced underground. I mean, they refer to them in the still round here locally, even though some of them are horses, they all refer to as pit ponies. They actually horses, but they did. There's one of them at Little Eaton, which ran from the Denby pits to Derby Canal. Luckily, when that didn't finish amazingly, this local, what they call gangline, horse-drawn railway, didn't finish until 1908, and they photographed it. And there's teams of horses with these primitive wagons taking coal down from the pits down to the Derby Canal, down the Little Eaton gangline.
Wow. So they weren't running them on wagon ways like they would have done in the northeast then.
Well, yeah. They use wagon ways in the northeast, but they call them ganglines or tramways in the East Midlands. But it's the same,
right?
Yeah,
I'm with you.
It's the same principle.
Yeah.
So we had that, but the Austrians round here were very popular as well, and we did have a preserved one at one time at Nottingham Industrial Museum.
Right.
That used to be from Pinkston, and I believe it's gone to the Lancashire Mining Museum. But there was a bit of controversy about it because the wood parts of that, they actually sawed through them with a chainsaw before they transported it, the original beams.
Oh no. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, because they're
So,
pretty rare now. Very rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing about you'll find out, and I'm sure I can't remember which one, but when the miners' strikes are on, a lot of places you'll find it definitely in the northeast and in the East Midlands. They used to arrange pit pony races, the miners. So obviously they were at
They
strike
did.
and they go in the
They
fields and race the pit ponies.
They
I think
did.
I'm more or less sure.
You're
I can't,
absolutely right. There's that racing connection.
yeah,
Yeah.
D.H.
Yes.
Lawrence writes about it, I think, in one of his stories.
Yeah.
I can't remember
Yeah.
whether it's Strike Bay or one of his short stories. He mentions where the
Right.
miners go riding these ponies on a race.
Right. I'll look out for that. Because yes, there's some lovely illustrations, pitmen's paintings in the Woodhorn Museum of pit ponies.
Yeah.
And there's definitely
Yeah,
one
I've
of
been
them
up there. Yeah,
racing them. Yeah.
it's about 10 years ago, but I did visit.
Good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, they were just absolutely essential to coal mining in so many different ways, the horses, and used in numerous ways, the horses and ponies.
Yeah, they're
Sharon,
still
Jesse, you mentioned
Yeah.
Equi. Yes, I've got that. I've got a few copies of that. That's brilliant, but I don't think I've got that one. Sorry, David, go on. Any more questions? Not sure how we're doing for time here. Oh, later than I thought. New message. Teresa's just commented about the blunts, the Crabbit stud and cull. Oh yes. Oh yeah. I'll go into this in even bigger detail in my Galloway book. Yeah. Mhm. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we'll call it there, a day there. But thank you all very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. And oh, Jean's just asked, did the blunt speed thoroughbreds as well? No, but he managed to get his Arabs into the stud book. Now that's a bit of a story on its own. They did own, I think, a few thoroughbreds, but again, there's a kind of a long back history to this, which is probably another talk, actually. Yeah. So yeah. Mhm. Complete. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming to the talk, and it is recorded, so it'll be available online. And you can obviously contact me through the Equine History Collective or in other ways on Facebook if you've got any more questions or thoughts. Hey. Right. Glad you enjoyed it, Jean. Nice to see you all. Nice to see some familiar new faces. Yep. So bye everybody.